Hello, I'm Scott Cheatham. I have enjoyed being in senior seminar, especially the word senior and being a senior and hopefully graduating this May. But I've really enjoyed also writing this paper. I've really enjoyed the research and the time that I've got to spend studying more about this topic. The topic that I chose was apostles in the modern day church. Are there apostles in our churches today? I'm very passionate about this. I'm passionate about the charismatic church movement and the charismatic doctrines because I get to travel around the world. I get to do a lot of mission work, leadership development, leadership growth, pastoral training, and I've seen the effects of the charismatic movement. I've seen the effects of the charismatic doctrine on pastors and leadership and the advancement of the gospel. And so it's something that burdens my heart. It's something that I want to be able to have more information about, to be able to combat some of these heresies. And so on this topic, are there apostles today? There are two different views. And the first is an apostolic cessationist. And obviously the word cessationist, they believe, and apostolic cessationists believe, that the office of apostle does not exist today. It has ceased either when the canon closed or the last apostle died. And then there's the other view, which is an apostolic continuationist. And they believe that the apostolic office has continued since the existence of the first apostles. And so we have those two camps and those two views. And to discuss those views, I wanted to look at three things when I wrote my paper. The first thing was the definitions. I think semantics matter, words matter, the way that people describe things or how people describe things. Oftentimes we can find truth in those definitions. So I wanted to see how the cessationalists define the term apostle and how the continuationists define the term apostle. Then we want to look at the biblical evidence and the historical evidence. And so the terminology, as we unpack that, the continuationist, the apostolic continuationist would tell you that the general word apostle means one sent. And so they believe that the word apostle is just this general word that is sent. And then in a specific sense, that it's sent with authority. That the term apostle is someone who has been sent, appointed, anointed by God with authority and has affirmed that calling through signs and wonders in their life. And those signs and wonders generally consist of prophecy, tongues, or healing. And the affirmation of that is an affirmation, or the signs of that manifestation of that is an affirmation of the calling of apostle in their life. And so because of that, they've been given great authority in their churches. They are considered church planners and church plant network directors. They're over several churches and several networks of churches. And so they've been placed in an authoritative position. And that would be the definition of a continuationist, of an apostle, that one who is sent with authority, who's been anointed by God to do signs and wonders and manifest their authority through those signs and wonders. Cessationists would view or give the definition of apostle as someone who was sent, but more specifically was a physical eyewitness to the ministry, to Jesus' ministry, or the resurrection of Jesus, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, who's been appointed by Christ and who has affirmed that appointment by Christ with signs and wonders. And so as we see the difference of definitions here, we see that the continuationist believes that anyone can be sent or anointed and have that authority. The cessationalists would tell you that they have to have been an eyewitness to Jesus and have to have been appointed by Jesus physically and have affirmed that calling through signs and wonders. And so we see the difference of opinion. By the cessationalist definition, it is impossible for someone to be an apostle today. And so as we turn from the definition and we look at the biblical evidence, there was three passages of scripture that I wanted to unpack. And the first was Ephesians chapter 2, verse 20. And this is where Paul's writing to the church at Ephesus, and he tells them that the apostles and the prophets were for the laying of the foundation of the church. And so we see that those were specific. Paul is describing this as a specific office used to lay the foundation of the church. And when I think of the word foundation, I think of something that can only be laid once. Houses don't have multiple foundations. They have one foundation, and it's built, and then the house is built off of that foundation. And that's how this has been described by most theologians, that the apostle and the prophet have have laid or helped lay the groundwork for the church to be built on. The continuationists would argue that the foundation is continually being laid, that it has never finally been laid, and that foundation is being laid around the world, and that there's still a need for the office of apostle. But Paul moves on in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and tells us that he was the last whom Jesus appeared to. And so if we go back to that definition of a biblical apostle and see that Jesus had to appear to them that we see in Acts, then we see that Paul, as he's describing himself as the last apostle to walk the earth. And so we see this description from Paul in Corinthians that he defines himself as being the last apostle. And then we look in Revelation 21:14 where John describes the vision that he received from God about the office of apostle and how God held the office or holds the office of apostle in high esteem. And so we see that the biblical evidence points to the cessation of the office of apostle, that it was a special office that was for the laying of the foundation, that Paul considered himself to be the last apostle, and that God holds the office of apostle as something in high regard and high esteem, and that's not an office that can be replicated today. That was a one-time office used for the laying of the foundation of the church. And as we move from the biblical evidence to the historical evidence, we see something very interesting happened. And something very interesting for me is that the historical evidence was just non-existent. That there was not a lot of historical evidence that pointed to the continuation of the office of apostle. People quit claiming to be apostles after the last apostle died. The people who were closest to the resurrection of Jesus and the death of the last apostles, those church fathers held that office, as MacArthur explains to us in the paper, holds that office in special regard. It was a special appointed office, and we see that they kind of took a step back and said that there was no one else who was appointed to that special office. And as we move through church history, one of the things that I found astonishing, the very men who we study who could have easily been called apostles refused to take the title of apostle because they held that office in such high regard. Men like Augustine and Luther and Calvin and Wesley and Whitefield refused to take the title of apostle because they felt as though that office was specific for that time, for the laying of the foundation of the church. And so as I look at the terms, as I look at the definition, as I look at the biblical evidence, as I look to the historical evidence, it clearly points to the cessation of the apostolic office. I think Grudem paints the picture beautifully. He says this, that if you take a scripture-only perspective, if you look at the scripture as our forefathers did, as we do, and as the terms tell us, then you will end up with a cessation view of the apostolic office. If you take a scripture plus perspective and you add things to scripture and you add signs and wonders and different things to the definition, then you will leave with a continuation apostolic view. And so for me, as I look at the terms and I look at the biblical evidence and historical evidence, I cannot help but see an apostolic cessationist view as being the most biblical view that we can have today. And so I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to share with you my thoughts on my paper, and I hope that you have a blessed day.